Welcome back. Today we're going to be discussing about virtual network as well as virtual network peering. First of all, let's start with the definition of what is an Azure Virtual Network. An Azure Virtual Network is a service that provides the fundamental building blocks for our private network within an Azure environment. This means that an instance of our service, which in this case is the Azure Virtual Network, can enable many types of Azure resources to securely communicate with each other or over the internet as well as within on-premises networks. These Azure resources can also include resources such as virtual machines. And so we see that our Azure Virtual Network is similar to traditional networks that typically are operated within a data center. But one thing about the Azure Virtual Network is that it brings extra benefits to our Azure cloud environment. Some of those extra benefits it brings are things like scalability, where you're able to scale your resources vertically or horizontally. It also brings about availability, in this sense, high availability, where we are able to replicate our data across multiple regions or zones. It also gives us the benefit of isolation within an Azure cloud environment. Some of the reasons why we might want to use an Azure virtual network is to, for example, filter our network traffic within an Azure environment. We can also use it to route network traffic as well as integrate with other Azure services. Most importantly, Azure Virtual Networks can also allow us to communicate with our on-premise resources as well as communicate between different Azure resources over the internet. Some key virtual network concepts to be aware of are our address space. And so when we create or provision a virtual network, we must specify a custom private IP address space. And you can implement this using either a public or private IP address. The subnets are also a very critical part of our virtual networks. Our subnet enable us to segment the virtual networks into a group of subnetworks. This is done by allocating a portion of our virtual network's address space to each subnet that we have within that virtual network. And so a virtual network can have one or more subnets. We can have a subnet that is the default subnet to be used by the virtual network, and then deploy another subnet within the virtual network for other critical Azure purposes, such as deploying an Azure Bastion. When provisioning our virtual network, we must also choose a region for our virtual network to be scoped into. It is very important to note that multiple virtual networks from various regions can also be connected to each other using our virtual network peering. And so let's take a deep dive into what virtual network peering is.